part of the criticism around Zoran and Jeffries was also his, I guess, MSNBC interview in which he said that he did support Jeffries to be Speaker of the House, which again is a separate thing from the primary challenge, right?
If Democrats win the midterms, do you want to see Leader Jeffries become the Speaker of the House?
Yes.
Okay. That was a firm, quick answer. So you leave plenty of time for my final answer.
Let me go back and give a little more.
Look,
So it does feel, especially in the wake, immediately in the aftermath of the condemning socialism vote, that it felt to many to be a sort of gratuitous affirmation of his status within the party.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. I agree with that. I would not have done that. I think Zoran was wrong there. I think there's no point to endorsing Hakeem Jefferies for Speaker of the House in 2027. I mean, he'll be Speaker very likely, but let the House sort that out. So yeah, I'm not. I don't think that was needed. Say it that way. And just also on the Jeffries thing, it was also a DSA vote. I mean, that's the thing we have to remember here. Like an organization took a vote. Yes, Zoran was highly influential, but it was even a 50-50 vote before then. So maybe Zoran bent it so it ended up being like whatever 53-46 against. But even if it was 53-46 for, it also has to go in front of, they cut the CLC, the Central Committee, and I heard they were not that enthusiastic about it. So I can say like DSA broadly in New York City was not enthusiastic about this race. And you can say that's wrong. You can say they should be enthusiastic, but the reality is, as much as Zoran was imposing himself, he was also responding to, honestly, a large number of members who weren't that fond of Chi Ossé and just didn't see any path, especially when they have a lot of other races. The thing you have to remember is they're going to have to fill Nydia Velasquez's seat now. That's an open seat. They would like to get a DSA member, a pro-Palestine member of Congress into that seat. They've got a lot of assembly primaries to run, including for Zoran's old seat. State Senate, I'm sure their state Senate races are looking at. So, I mean, they've got a slate. So the question for DSA too always comes down to capacity. It's not like a fun question. It's not a sexy question, but it's like, well, what do we have the capacity to do? I mean, they debated endorsing Zoran for mayor. They ended up doing it. But, the capacity question is a big one. So I think for DSA itself, putting Zoran aside, a lot of them were not sure, can we do this primary and do another primary and do our whole slate for the state legislature and do our state Senate slate? So, these are the questions they have to weigh. Ultimately, it was a divided vote in the organization. So at best, Chi Ossé would walk away with something a little over 50% of an organization. So it's not like there was this great groundswell for Chi Ossé. I mean, that's also the truth. I'm not defending Jeffries at all. I've not offered any defenseless politics. It's simply there wasn't a groundswell within DSA to do it. Maybe Chi Ossé should have done it anyway. Maybe the half
Yeah,
of DSA who voted
I
should
think
do it. That's on him. He can run. He can still
right,
run.
but that's the
He
that's
can
the
still do
thing.
it.
A statement that DSA says we don't have the resources, we won't be backing this campaign, but we support a primary challenge against Jeffries. Zoran saying something along the lines of, I'm not weighing in, but certainly I support primary challenges when incumbents are out of step with the will of their constituents. We live in a democracy, you know, let every flower bloom is a very different thing from working behind the scenes to actively dissuade Chief from running at all. I don't know that one can take the posture that, hey, the DSA took a vote and that's the way the cookie crumbles, when prior to that vote, it was reported that Zoran was discouraging Chief from running. And then, of course, Zoran weighed in the way he did. And who knows how much effect that had, but certainly it
Yeah,
seems
I mean, it probably tilted it
logical that it had a
against,
significant effect.
but I think even if Zoran had not weighed in at all, Chi Ossé is probably walking away with at best like a little over 50% of that vote. If Zoran did nothing, and then the CLC has to decide ultimately. And I heard the DSA leadership was not keen on Chi Ossé. I don't know how they would have voted. I have no idea. But I'm just saying you can argue Zoran shouldn't work behind the scenes, sure. But the point is, even if Zoran had been completely hands off and said, let things happen, this would have been a very contested and divided vote, maybe would have squeaked through. And then, yeah, then Chi Ossé's got DSA and, he goes and does it. But it wasn't something that had broad base support within DSA, even putting aside Zoran's advocacy. That's just the truth. That's just what I've seen in talking to people and just the outcome of the vote. I mean, it was like it's a 50-50 either way.
I've heard people argue that AOC didn't have DSA support prior to her run either.
No, not really. No, she got it late. She was running for a while without it, but again, DSA was very inconsequential at that point. You have to wind the clock back to 2018, where DSA was growing. They were small but growing. They're a much smaller chapter, and their Justice Democrats was helping her. And look, I mean, again, Joe Crowley. I think you've rose-colored glasses on the Joe Crowley legacy here. I mean, he's an Israel hawk, Iraq War
But
guy. I
that's
mean, he
not, but
supported
that's not what I'm
would have been
arguing, Ross.
all in on genocide if he had been still in
Right.
Congress.
But
And
it
that's
was
just
2018, and this was not an issue
pro-apart.
that
I
was
mean, but it was
right.
the what? I
And it
mean,
was
ask
20, it's
Nerdeen. I don't want to speak for
2018. It wasn't a
Nerdeen, but
mobilizing issue for
2018
the party.
Palestinians were getting or experiencing apartheid in the West
Of course
Bank. I
they were.
mean,
Ross,
missiles were raining into
is
Gaza.
your contention that Gaza is a similarly polarizing and motivating issue at the
No,
polls
it's more
today as it
polarizing
was in
now.
2018?
No,
Okay,
it
so
is
that's
more.
my point. My point is that
But
Hakeem
that doesn't
Jeffries
mean
is
you'll
getting
win,
called
though.
Apac Shakur on one of America's biggest radio shows because the whole country, on a bipartisan basis, has turned against Israel as a consequence of the genocide it's been litigating for 2 years. And so Hakeem Jeffries is uniquely vulnerable in that regard, I would argue. And particularly in Nerdeen, I want to talk to you about this because I've seen online that you have been one of the more consistent and I think really level-headed but consistent critics of Zohran Mamdani in your perception that he has shifted in some ways from what we had hoped in terms of his rhetoric foretold prior to winning the election versus now. And I'd like to give you an opportunity to sort of lay out your concerns with respect to the Palestine piece in particular.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you remember me, Ross, but when you were running in 2018, you actually generously offered your office for us to like do DEPCA practice and other, community events and stuff like that. So, I've known about Zohran Mamdani for years. I've known about you for years. I've volunteered with the Arab American Association when I was like 13 years old. So, I really see my position as somebody and as our movement, as someone that really needs to outflank, of course, the Democratic Party and all of these, people on this issue. So I'm not here to pick at personalities. I'm here to question what concrete choices say about what kind of politics we're building. And I feel like, a lot of the criticisms that have been made against him have just been met with a lot of hostility, a lot of anger. There's been kind of like a cult of personality around Zohran when it comes to this issue. And, I think, if anything, us criticizing him is helpful for him to come closer to our position because he can point and say that there's constituents that, are pushing for this. And it's not just the Zionist constituents that he's capitulating to all the time. So, especially when it's things about policing, state power, and questions of Palestine. These are things that, we have to weigh in on. And I think one of the biggest issues, like we previously mentioned, is his reappointment of Jessica Tisch, remaining as the NYPD commissioner under his administration. Typically, every mayor picks their own commissioner. It's happened before where they've been reappointed, but there's been this pushback where it's like, oh, well, if he reappointed her, there would be like mutiny in the NYPD and, they would, his life would be in danger and all these like silly arguments when, like you said, or I don't know if it was said in this interview, but like she was never on the beat. She was not a cop herself. She's not particularly liked in the NYPD. She is there, for the billionaire class that, in his campaign, he called out. She is a through and through Zionist. She began, in counterterrorism, leading police surveillance, racialized policing, all of the things that, as somebody who grew up and organized in Bay Ridge, like my community, were particularly victims of. The mosque I prayed at, the shops I went to, the Islamic school I attended, they were all surveilled by the NYPD. Which, she was part of. So, for many activists and community members, especially in Black, Brown, immigrant, and Palestine solidarity spaces, keeping Tish means keeping a commissioner that embodies the same institutional power that criminalizes dissent, surveils Muslims and Arab communities, and collaborates with militarized policing practices. I mean, this is somebody who had NYPD attend trainings that equated keffiyehs and watermelons as anti-Semitic symbols. This is somebody who overturned the decision to fire an NYPD sergeant who killed, Alan Felice. So I don't, I think this is particularly one place where he needs to be criticized, and she really does need to be replaced. I mean, she represents the continuity of Adams' notoriously, corrupt department. So going on, I believe it was the Teo with Mehdi Hassan, and saying like she rooted out corruption as if she's still not part and parcel of that corruption, really gives cover, to Zionism and to, the abuses of the NYPD that they've inflicted on all our communities, particularly pro-Palestinian protests throughout this genocide. Not many people may know this in particular, but her family also owns the Lowe's Regency Hotel, which is where Benjamin Netanyahu stays at every single time he comes to New York. That is his hotel of choice. We've protested outside it, many times with some of the, largest police response that we've seen, to that. And it just, how can you run on saying you're going to arrest Netanyahu while you're praising essentially his host at the same time? And even, you brought up the Park East synagogue earlier, Brianna, and the protests outside of that. There was a settler recruitment fair, and if we say it's a genocide, we believe it's a genocide. That's like, recruiting people to go help out, carry out the Holocaust. Like that's just what it is. Her response, Jessica Tisch's response to that was that they didn't have a strong enough response. She apologized to them.
Let me actually read that for you, because I did pull that up. I was just trying to familiarize myself before recording with what had happened, and frankly didn't realize that she had weighed in so extensively in this New York Times piece. The Times reports the clash also highlighted a difference in approach between Mr. Mamdani and the police commissioner, Jessica Tisch, a strong supporter of Israel who appeared at the synagogue in person on Saturday. Speaking at Shabbat services, Ms. Tisch expressed regret that the police department had not done more to shield the synagogue's entryway from the protest turmoil, especially at this time of, quote, heightened fear within the Jewish community. She also said she deeply and personally understood the pain the congregation was experiencing. Her comments were met with a standing ovation, according to the Times of Israel. The piece goes on to talk about another rabbi who suggested to Zoron reportedly that they implement a law that would ban protesting outside of places of worship. And the rabbi said, again, this isn't what Zoron himself has said, but the rabbi said that Zoron said, "I love this idea and I can't thank you enough." So that is the Tish of it all, her clear alignment with Zionists, her own self-reported and described Zionism, her choice to go to the synagogue and give this speech, which was met with a standing ovation afterward. How should we understand, Ross, the choice to keep Tish on board, not to mention the general over-policing that has been protested for the last 10 years or so in the context of BLM?
Yeah. I mean, I'll open and say I don't disagree with any of the points made about Jessica Tisch. There's nothing that was not factual. I've written about this, sort of the pros and cons, honestly, of her reappointment. I've written several pieces about her. Some I can give sort of the pro argument for it, and then also I think the con argument's very clear. The argument for Jessica Tisch is that she was not so much Eric Adams as police commissioner, but the one sort of imposed upon him after his other commissioners had resigned. I mean, it was actually not his choice. I wouldn't say she's dogged by the continuity concerns. I mean, she worked in the NYPD under, I believe, Bloomberg and de Blasio. And she is sort of on this anti-corruption crusade of sorts, at least the top of the department. We'll see where that goes or what that means. But really, I mean, the truth is, it's a choice he made to try to keep certain interests at bay as he pursues this affordability agenda. That it's a way to peacekeep as he attempts to get his money for pre-K, his money for buses, Also works towards just stacking his rent guidelines board, which Eric Adams is stacking the other way right now. And it's a way to kind of make his life slightly easier. Now, I think there are a lot of pitfalls to Jessica Tisch. So I'm not here to give in a way I argued more for not endorsing Chi Ossé. I don't make the same, kind of enthusiastic argument for Jessica Tisch. I think it could be fraught, to be frank. I think his argument is I can make Jessica Tisch do what I want. She serves me. And therefore, if I implement a police reformist agenda, if I tell her, not to continue to institute a surveillance state, she will follow my lead as the mayor. I don't know if that's true. I don't know. We're going to find out. Bill de Blasio appointed Bill Bratton. Bratton and de Blasio lasted about 2 years, and Bratton departed. I don't know if Jessica Tisch is going to be Zohran Mamdani's only police commissioner. I think in terms of Zionism, it's going to be hard to find an anti-Zionist police commissioner, but I will say there are other choices he could have made. I just think there aren't many in the top of the NYPD people qualified from the department who are also explicitly anti-Zionist. I don't know. I don't think those people are.
I mean, I
are
don't
out
think
there.
anybody is really calling for that at the end of the day. It just didn't have to be like the literal worst one. I mean, no matter who the NYPD commissioner is, there's going to be friction there. They are the ones who are beating, our people on the streets of New York. But I think a lot of it does go back to the administration. Like under Bill de Blasio, we were able to protest, and I'm not saying that there weren't, incidents of police brutality. Of course, these are all things we've witnessed ourselves. But really, under Tish, under Adams, it just increased, 20-fold. Bay Ridge, where we were both based, we have a Nekba Day rally every single year for over a decade, usually without incident. And then under the Adams administration, it just became, particularly brutal. So, we're going to see how that plays out under Zohran. But, I also think what concerns me in addition to this Tish question is the fact that, he said he's pledging to do 800% more support or funding, a funding pledge for anti-hate crime prevention around, he mentioned anti-Semitism specifically when it comes to that. And, also, Brianna, you're also, in the legal field. We know that these grants, what they really do is criminalize anti-Zionist organizing. I mean, who tracks, anti-Semitic hate crimes? Groups like the ADL, groups that count saying Free Palestine as an anti-Semitic incident, groups that count Palestine protests as an anti-Semitic incident. Right now, there's a 20-year-old Palestinian in federal prison in MDC in Sunset Park, not too far from Bay Ridge, who was sentenced for essentially having bar fights with Zionists, having like little, street skirmishes, who was sentenced on a hate crime charge. And I think, in totality with keeping Tish on, I think that ultimately is going to repress people further and pull people away from organizing and from protesting, because they're literally fearing for their lives. They're fearing for their bodies. I've been arrested many times by the NYPD since October 2023. Prior to that, really not that much, maybe one or two times for protesting. And, never have the charges ever stuck. I've never been convicted of anything. The cop never shows up. It's always dismissed. It's always an ACD. But the punishment is really petered out with their physical abuse of my body. That's what's happened to our community. And I think, this is going to continue the chilling of our speech, of our protests, because we're not really seeing change in the NYPD when it comes to this Zionist commissioner.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's all fair. I say all fair points, to be frank. And I think you and others need to watch closely this administration, because it will be on Zoran to ensure that protesters at the minimum are being treated as well, I'll say well in quotation marks, as they were under Bill de Blasio. I mean, that has to be sort of the bare minimum. Ideally, you're doing much better. And I think, yeah, I think for pro-Palestine organizations, for the New York Civil Liberties Union, for all these groups, I mean, they have to keep a close watch. And the reality is, this was not a campaign that was all that centered around policing. It just wasn't relative to other mayoral campaigns. But he's going to be the mayor, and he ran on a promise of real reform. And there's no doubt expectations are very high. So if his choice has been made to retain Tish, it's got to be Zoran Mamdani's Tish, not the Jessica Tisch under Eric Adams, who's free to sort of run a quasi police state, or certainly under like a Michael Bloomberg, who's sort of the police state mayor. So this is it's going to be a very important time. I think Zoran does know that, but he needs to ensure that at the very minimum people have a right to protest and protest safely. I agree that this idea of banning protest outside of houses of worship seems very anti-First Amendment. I don't understand that at all. I mean, if you want to have a barricade of some kind and have security and people can do it peacefully, that's good. And I agree too. I mean, I find it very tiresome, the policing around slogans. I hate it myself that you have to circumscribe every single type of chant to the point where everything becomes hate speech. That's why I'm a free speech believer and a skeptical of these kinds of things. So, I myself, felt he could have made other choices, and I wrote about that. There's another policing official who supported his campaign or helped out in his campaign, Rodney Harrison, who worked for the NYPD. He's in Suffolk County too. And I don't know. Again, I don't know how long Jessica Tisch will be there. I really don't know. If you told me halfway through his term there's a different police commissioner, I wouldn't be surprised at all, unless either one of two things will happen, right? Either Zoran stays true to his progressive leftist vision on policing, certainly, and Jessica Tisch conforms, and Jessica Tisch becomes, the loyal deputy, and all is well, or she doesn't. And either Zoran is okay with that, and then if he is okay with that, he gets a tremendous amount of pressure from the left, or she leaves. And perhaps it's not the worst thing ultimately if she leaves.
Yeah, look, I talked about this in the podcast before. Zoran did an interview with another lefty podcast where they pressed him on this question more so than any other interviewer has. So kudos to them. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of the podcast. Hell something. Anyway,
Hellgate is
Hellgate.
Hellgate.
Yes,
Yes, Hellgate.
podcast.
Yes, they did ask. Yes.
And his response was more or less, well, she's going to be my commissioner and she'll do what I say. Okay, look, if this is some like four-dimensional chess and Zoran knows that basically she will be pressured into leaving because she won't be willing to conform with his agenda, which is genuinely a progressive, police reform agenda, but that keeping her on and making it basically her choice instead of his enables him to pacify Hochul and others, then I will credit him with the strategery when that moment comes. But what's almost been more frustrating from my perspective is not what Zoran does or does not do, but the excuse making that's coming out of some quarters of the left, preemptively justifying whatever choice that he makes, even if there's a lack of transparency, because quote unquote winning is the goal. I was kind of taken aback by this piece by Jonathan Ben Meacham in The Nation, who pointed out that people like Alex Vitale, who has now also been named a member of Zoran's transition team, who is a police abolitionist, were very critical of keeping Tish on. He discouraged him doing so, arguing that she would, quote, never truly ally with him. Others called it a big mistake. Clayton Klippenstein called it a straitjacket, yada, yada. But he goes on to say, there is a clear explanation for Mamdani's decision. There was no organized opposition. There wasn't even a rumored alternative to Tish, let alone a concerted campaign to propose one. The left doesn't build talent pipelines for police brass, and I'm not arguing that we should start. We want to reduce police resources, staffing, and technology. Yet our inaction meant Mamdani saw no constituency for another choice. Okay, so we have to, in your words, Nerdeen, appoint the worst one.
Literally.
Because the left isn't recruiting cops to be police commissioner. Also, what are we imagining the qualifications for police commissioner are if Tish herself didn't have a typical background of a police commissioner, but seems to be very openly just kind of like a touch point for New York elites into the police department. And the last point I'll make here, can we play this clip of Mamdani meeting with Donald Trump, where Donald Trump made a lot of hay in a complimentary way of his choice to keep Tish on.
Level.
I've committed over the course of the campaign to maintain the 35,000. That's the head count that we had through the campaign.
And not replace them with caseworkers, social workers.
No, I've said that's the head count that we want. What we need to do is make sure they can focus on serious crime.
And he just retained a great police commissioner, I believe, right?
Yes, we did, Commissioner Tish.
If the newspapers are correct.
That one they're correct about.
He retained, I think, somebody that is she's a good friend of some of the people in my family, of Ivanka, and they say she's really good, really competent, and he just retained her, so that's a good sign.
I mean, it's not a good look. Hey, YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.